All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Search Central SEO Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the search relations team here at Google. And part of what we do are these office hour sessions where people can jump in and ask their questions around web search. We have a bunch of questions submitted already, so we can go through some of those. But there are also people with their hands raised, so I'll go through you all first, or we can see how far we go. All right, let's see. Akash, you're first on my list.
Hi, sir. Hi.
Hi.
So my question is related to people also ask sub feature, which is like present in Google. So if if a link is for any of the query, if your that particular URL is been ranked at people also asked, right? So is it still counted as a clicks or impression? If users click on it, and how that feature is been like uh, added to the search console part? Is it like the clicks and all those things are been tracked or monitored? And just a follow up on that, what if the users click on some other questions and then your query gets added to that like particular list? So like how is these things like monitored or calculated? Like is it still counted as a particular rank on the SERP, or it is just people also ask and only the clicks and impression can be calculated?
Good question. So the short answer is whenever there's a URL shown in the search results, we do try to show that in Search Console. So with the people also ask section, I think it is that if you expand it, then it shows a link to your site with kind of that question and the snippet there. That means whenever someone expands that people also ask section and sees the URL for your site, then that is counted as an impression. And it doesn't matter if you're kind of like the first one in the people also ask, or if people click like 15 different ones, and then suddenly yours shows up. That would be counted as an impression. And also when a click happens, that gets counted as a click. I think the ranking, the position is based on the kind of the overall position of that group of elements. So it doesn't, at least as far as I know, it doesn't count like within the people also ask section what position you are.
So let's say if any of a particular domain's URL is in people also ask, can it also be in the SERP results? Because I
Sure,
think
sure.
it,
The Search Console, the performance report shows from the only thing to watch out for. So the performance report shows the ranking of the topmost items. So if you're listed, if like different URLs are listed multiple times in a search results page, it tracks the position of the first one.
okay, that's interesting. And one more question, sir. Like when you have subdomains, it could be like a blog or a help forum or resources. So how good is like Google to like properly recognize like this subdomain is not something a different one, but it's a subsidiary of the particular domain, which is only in the forms of a blog or could be like help forum or resources, but not a different completely domain which already has been told, right? Because subdomain has been calculated as a different domain. So like it's a part of the current domain and not completely a new website. uh, and when it comes to the internal link, and when you say key like you try to map your important URLs through your home pages and from other relevant pages. So what if the blog page is in subdomain? So will that home page should be considered, or the original home like example.com should be considered as a link from the home page to the particular pages?
Yeah, so specifically around the links there, I don't think we would differentiate that much. So it's not that we would say, oh, this is an internal link or an external link. It's essentially just we found this link from this one page.
But then we have two home pages. One is like a blog home page, and then you have an additional home page which is your a proper website.
Yeah,
So
I
when
from our point of view, those are just pages, essentially. We don't say, oh, this is a home page, or this is a kind of a product page or a category page. We essentially say this is a page, and this is what it's relevant for.
And these subdomains name as like blogs and help and forum and dot resources. So those are just categorized as the some additional parts of that particular domain rather
Yeah.
than a completely new website. Like
Yeah.
that particular part of recognition is completely done at Google's end.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Cool. Nathan.
Hi. I think you recently said that if there was like a domain there where there used to be a website on it, and then it dropped out of so it was deleted, then there's a new website at some point, then the links that were to the old website don't count anymore, which seems pretty logical. But we've got this kind of situation now, so we've created Search Console for this new website, and in Search Console, I do see at least one link from the former owner that's still there. Does that mean that this link would actually still count, as Search Console does, show it?
I don't know if it would count, but the important part, I think, with Search Console and the link report there is we try to show all the links that we know of to that site. It's not a sign that we think these are important links or that they count.
All right.
So in particular, things like no-follow links, they would still be listed. Disavowed links would still be listed. Links that we just ignore for other reasons, they could still be listed as well. So just because it's listed doesn't mean it's actually a relevant or a helpful link for the site.
OK. Clear. Thanks.
Cool. Angie.
Hi, John. I have a question about building my mobile site on AMP. So will it still be cached by Google the same way as a site with an AMP version would be? And it would appear in search results in the Google cache viewer. And what happens if there is an error that invalidates the page? Will it just not be shown at all in the search results?
So I think you need to watch out for the difference between having pages that are purely on AMP and pages that are kind of this paired setup. And if a page is purely on AMP, from our point of view, it's essentially a normal HTML page. It can also be a valid AMP page. And if it is a valid AMP page, then we can use the AMP cache and kind of all of the AMP functionality in search as well. But either way, it's still an HTML page. So that would still be indexed normally, even if it's an invalid AMP page. And the cache page should also just work normally like any other HTML page. I suspect it might be a bit tricky with the AMP page with regards to JavaScript and CSS there. I don't know how that's embedded on AMP pages.
So the caching or serving it from the cache in search results may not be consistent.
Yeah. It's,
OK.
So I don't know how the JavaScript side kind of plays in there. Like, one way you can do this is to double check what it actually looks like in the cache. Another thing you could check is to disable JavaScript and then load the page. My understanding is from the AMP format is it would just work, essentially. But I don't remember all of the details there. So I double check.
OK. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Omar.
Hi, John. We acquired a site that came with plenty of internal links in the footer section of each page. And some of these links are not as relevant. So I wanted to ask if it is likely to be seen as problematic by Google, because the links are not necessarily contextual, but because they're just jumbled together in the footer, and they're just selected by a plugin. We're scared that removing them from hundreds of pages might mess up the site structure. So just wanted your opinion on this.
So I suspect for the most part that wouldn't cause any problems. I would see this more as these are links on these pages. They're normal internal links. and kind of look at it from the point of view, does this help to give context to the rest of the pages on the website? And for example, if you have a larger website and essentially every page is linked with every other page, there's no real context there. So it's hard for us to understand what the overall structure is, which of these pages is more important. Because if you're linking to everything, then it's like everything is not important. So that's kind of the element that I would watch out for. Whether or not they're in the footer, that from my point of view is irrelevant. If they're generated by a plugin or added manually, I don't think that matters either. I would just kind of watch out from a structural point of view. Does it actually make sense to have these links? And some amount of cross-linking definitely makes sense, I'd say, especially if you have kind of a setup where you have related pages that are cross-linked. That, from my point of view, always makes sense. Extreme cross-linking, where you're really cross-linking every page with every other page, from my point of view, doesn't really make sense.
Right. I think we've reached at the same conclusion, but we're at a point where we're scared to remove all of them, because they've not been placed by a human, right? It was a plugin that was automatically placing internal links to supposedly relevant articles on the website. Now we realize that a better approach would be would be something that you're also suggesting, where we selectively choose those links and then link to relevant pages. So my question would be that if we just disable the plugin and all these links suddenly evaporate, or they miss out from the page, would it affect the website in any way, or should we just try to slowly remove links from one page at a time or something like that?
Yeah, my guess is it would affect how it's shown in search, but it's impossible to kind of say, will it be a positive effect or a negative effect? I think that's kind of the tricky part there. What I would do to try to understand what the current situation is and what the next step would be is to run a crawler over your website. And a lot of the website crawlers that are out there, they will generate this kind of a graph of how your pages are linked together. And then you could disable the plugin, maybe on a staging version of your website, maybe even on the live one for a short period of time, crawl again, and then compare those graphs and see, is this crawler still able to find all of the content? And does it look like there's insufficient cross-linking there? And if so, then that gives you a little bit more kind of trust that just disabling the plugin will be OK. From our point of view, it doesn't matter if these links are automatically placed, or placed by a plugin, or placed by machine learning, or whatever. That's essentially, they're just links that we find on your website.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, John.
Cool. All right, Jason.
Cool. Hi, John. So I have a question about hidden or invisible text. So the support doc about the topic addresses the intent to deceive or trick bots by including excessive keywords to establish topical relevance. My question is one of clarification. Is all hidden text against webmaster guidelines? And to kind of dig into it and give a little bit of context as to why I'm asking this question, we have some elements we include across multiple pages, along with internally assigned identifiers for each element, right? So those identifiers don't mean anything to users. It wouldn't make sense to display them. But as an SEO, it could make my life a lot easier if, for example, I did a site colon search with K25987J to ensure that that K25987J element is displaying on the intended pages and that those pages are in the index. Or, for another practical use case, if using dynamic search ads for my paid media folks on, they could use a page content contains dynamic ad target to find that text and run PPC campaigns based on that. So I'm curious on any thoughts you may have here.
I don't think that would be problematic. Hidden text from our point of view is more problematic when it's really about deceiving the search engines with regards to what is actually on a page. So kind of the extreme example would be that, I don't know, you have a page about shoes, and there's a lot of hidden text there that is about, I don't know, the Olympics or something like that. And then suddenly your shoe page starts ranking for these Olympic terms. But actually, when a user goes there, there's nothing about the Olympics. And that would be kind of problematic from our point of view. I think we do a reasonable job in recognizing hidden text and trying to avoid that from happening. But that's kind of the reason we have this kind of element in the Webmaster Guidelines. Using it to display something that you don't necessarily kind of want to deceive anyone for, that's from my point of view is perfectly fine. Also, accessibility is a common reason for kind of hidden text on a page, where you have kind of the tab targets set up that way that you can tab to them, and then your screen reader will say something about that. But they're not visible directly on the page, and that's also perfectly fine. So I wouldn't have any fear or any doubt that that setup that you described would work.
Fair enough. Thanks. Yeah, it was a carryover from back in the day before the rise of machine learning and AI, when you'd see this wall of white and you highlight it and, oh, there's actual text here. Yeah. Makes sense. Thanks.
Cool. All right, Sergio.
Hey, John. I have a couple of questions. We had created about 42 landing pages that were created dynamically. And I actually asked for your help a couple of months ago looking at those, because they didn't get indexed. And out of those 42, only about 6 of them have been indexed. They're ranking well. They're getting the traffic. All good. But there's then the other, like 95% of them that were crawled and discovered about 8 weeks ago, and it's still not indexed. And back then you said to me, well, it's only been discovered for the past 24, 48 hours. So give it a couple of weeks, and if it's not indexed, then come back and ask. So it's been 8 weeks and still struggling with that. I'm not really sure what I can do.
Yeah.
I can share some URLs if necessary.
Yeah, if you can drop some URLs, maybe with the keyword discovered, not crawled, or not indexed into the chat, I can pull that out afterwards and take a look at that.
Yeah, those are, like, I just added a few of those URLs, and yeah, like I said, they've been crawled but not indexed for about 6 to 8 weeks, more or less.
Yeah. I mean, I can't promise that they'll be indexed at some point in the future. We just don't index everything from all websites. But I'm happy to pass these on to the team to see if there is any kind of a general problem on our side that we need to look at there.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I would like to know is more or less what else I can do to make them, if there's something that we're failing to deliver for those pages to be indexed, then it would be nice for us to know, so that we can make the necessary improvements.
Yeah.
So that's one. And the other question that I wanted to ask was, we also have some affiliate programs, and currently we get other people to talk about us, and we're trying to be very careful with the type of backlink tags that they use when they link back to us, to not get in trouble. But we noticed that some of them are not using anything, so they would typically just use a hyperlink with the domain URL as a do follow within their. They sometimes create review pages about the company, and I wanted to ask if that was seen as a problem or something against the guidelines. I know that they have some of the links that link back to product pages or commercial pages. They are using the sponsored tag, but then at some point there's a mention of the company itself with the URL to the domain as a do follow. And my question was, is that problematic?
Yeah. So I would say, especially when it comes to affiliate links, for the most part, if we can see that the bulk of these links are handled appropriately, so with the no follow or the rel equals sponsored, then individual ones that are handled differently, from our point of view, that's usually fine. It's not going to be the case that we say, oh, there are, I don't know, 900 affiliate links, and they have the rel sponsored on them, and 2 that don't have the rel sponsored on them, that we penalize a website for that or anything like that. So I wouldn't worry about that. I would make sure that your affiliates are aware of these guidelines, that they should be using these kind of tags to mark up the links. And if you're providing any links for them, kind of include that by default. But I wouldn't sweat the exceptions that happen, because it's I don't know, it's just common. It just happens.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Just one quick question regarding those URLs. Is there anywhere I can follow up, or just to kind of know?
Yeah, usually I forward those to their team, and then they take a look. And there's not necessarily anything that I can give back to people to kind of say like, oh, it's like you have to do this, or this was a problem. So it's more about kind of forwarding feedback to the team.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right, Hazel.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I've got two questions. One is about the recent pirate update. We noticed that a document that Google sent to United States Copyright Office, which clearly states that websites that receive a large volume of notice will be donated. So we just wonder, how does Google define this volume? Like more than maybe 1,000 notice per day, or maybe like over tens of thousands per day?
I don't know. I don't think like the exact thresholds would be something that we would share either. So I mean, on the one hand, I don't know the details of that that recent document. I saw that briefly mentioned somewhere on Twitter, but I don't know what the full background there is. But thresholds like that, they can also be a bit dynamic. And I doubt that there would be one specific number that we would share on that.
Okay, so maybe do you have any idea that maybe which niche that this algorithm more focus on? Maybe like entertainment or like shopping site?
I don't know. My guess. So I don't know. I probably shouldn't be guessing on these kind of legal topics. But my guess is this is something that just happens in general for DMCA complaints, and not that we would have the algorithm like try to fine tune by the type of site.
Okay, so like we are in e-commerce site, like we notice that maybe most e-commerce sites with many products have a high risk of infringement, because the products on the page is uploaded by the seller on the site, even though the site have strict policy. So we just wonder, maybe maybe we received 20 or 30 notice per day. We just wonder that if it can get our site like get penalized or demoted. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it like that amount of complaints to me would suggest that maybe you have a chance to implement something more automatic to catch these on your side. But I honestly don't know if that would be enough to kind of flag something like this.
Okay, thanks. More about the question is about the page performance. Like we want to improve the page performance, like some metrics like LCP, FID. So we want to change the way of loading item description and like some reviews content from synchronous to asynchronous on user side. But for Googlebot side, this content it will still be the synchronous. Do you think this way, when we're doing this, we have any impact to the site from SEO side?
That sounds fine. Yeah, that's essentially similar to the dynamic rendering setup that we used to recommend, where you use JavaScript for the client side and you statically render the content for Googlebot and other search engines. And from our point of view, if it's the same content, you're just delivering it in a slightly different way, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. Thank you.
Cool. OK, I still have a bunch of hands raised. I'll get back to you, but I just want to run through some of the submitted questions so that we don't lose track of those as well. All right. let's see. So the first question I have here is about images. We have a question about the importance of image file names for site ranking. We're using an intelligent CDN provider, which has been replacing the image file names with unique numbers. And notice that all the images are 404s in Search Console. Disabling the CDN would significantly degrade overall site performance. Will image alt text and captions be sufficient for Google to understand without an appropriate image file name title? So I think there are two things here that I would look at. On the one hand, if these are images that you need to have indexed in image search, then you should definitely make sure that you have a stable file name for your images. That's, I think, kind of the most important element here. You don't mention that these numbers or these URLs change. But sometimes these CDNs essentially provide a kind of a session-based ID for each image. And if the image URL changes every time we crawl, then essentially we'll never be able to index those images properly. This is mostly because for images, we tend to be a little bit slower with regards to crawling and indexing. So if we kind of see an image once and we say, oh, we should take a look at this, and we try to crawl it again at some later stage, and the number has changed by then we will just drop that image from our search results, from the image rankings. And essentially, we'll say, oh, well, this image that we thought was here is actually no longer here anymore. So the most important part here is kind of figuring out, do you care about image search? And if so, you need to make sure that you have a stable URL for all of these images. It doesn't matter if it's a number or if it's a text or anything like that. It should just be stable. That's kind of the most important part here. The other part that you mentioned is the image alt text and the captions, which kind of suggests that you're interested in web search, not necessarily image search. And for web search, we don't need to be able to crawl and index the images, because we essentially just look at the web pages themselves. So things like the alt text, any captions, headings on the page, all of that play into understanding this page a little bit better. And for web search, that's all we need. If all of the images were, for example, 404 all the time, or blocked by robots text, for web search, we would still treat that page exactly the same as if we were able to index all of those images. It's just in image search itself, that's where we need to be able to kind of index these images and understand that they're stable URLs and understand how they kind of connect with the rest of your site. We have a domain with a history as an escort service provider. The site was relaunched and rebranded and now focuses on an entirely different niche. All previous backlinks have been disavowed, and we've been in contact with a long list of providers who have all reviewed our site and unblocked us. Within the search results, though, we're still getting flagged for explicit content. Is there a way to get reconciled via Google? How do we go about this? So for the most part, this kind of understanding of which content we would filter by safe search is handled automatically. And if we recognize that a site has changed significantly, then essentially we will treat it differently in the search results as well. And over time, we will essentially kind of remove that safe search bit for the site or for those pages. So depending on when you made this change, it might be that you just need to be a little bit more patient, and it'll settle down properly. If you want to, you can also send me a URL. I don't know if you're here in the chat, or if you want to add it to the question itself. And kind of send me the URL of your site, and I can double check with the team here to make sure that everything is kind of lined up. In the past, it used to be a lot more focused on kind of older content. We kind of keep things in the safe search list for a longer time. But essentially, a lot of that is completely automated in the meantime. And if your site changes significantly, then we should be able to take that into I have a question about targeting the same keyword on 2 different pages. One is a feature page, and the other is an informational piece about that feature. Is it OK to target the same main keyword on those 2 different pages? So first of all, it's totally OK to target whatever keywords that you want. From our point of view, we're not going to hold you back. The thing I would watch out for is kind of like, are you competing with yourself? And that's almost more of a strategic question rather than kind of a pure SEO question, and definitely not something where we'd say there are guidelines that you should not do this. But it's more that if you have multiple pieces of content that are ranking for the same query with the same intent, then you're essentially kind of diluting the value of the content that you're providing across multiple pages. They're competing with each other. And that could mean that these individual pages themselves are not that strong when it comes to competing with other people's websites. So that sometimes is something that I would watch out for. If you have 2 pages and they're both targeting the same keyword and they have very different intents, then from my point of view, that seems kind of reasonable, because people might be searching for that keyword with kind of like extra text added for one intent and extra text added for the other intent. And they're essentially unique pages. And it can make sense for either both of them to appear in search, or kind of the best matching one to appear in search. So that's kind of my take it on there. And like I said, it's not something that we require or that is like OK or not OK. It's really a matter of kind of your strategic positioning on how you want to appear in search. Is there a good ratio or consideration on Google's side when it comes to the amount of pages? In other words, are positions of high traffic ranking pages hurt by many, let's say, 50% of total pages on our domain not being indexed, or being indexed but not receiving traffic? So I guess the question is more around, like, I have some set of pages that are very popular and a lot of pages that are not very popular. And that kind of describes the average website, where you have a variety of content, and some of it is very popular, and some of it just isn't that popular. So from our point of view, that's kind of perfectly fine. Also, just the bulk number of pages, I think, is a misleading metric, because it's easy to have a lot of pages that are not being seen as very important, and then they don't appear a lot in search. And that can be perfectly fine. Like if you have 5 pages like that, or 100 pages, or 1,000 pages, if they're not showing up in search, they're not causing any problems either. So from that point of view, it's sometimes tricky just to look at the bulk number of pages versus the pages that are actually being shown in the search results. The other thing maybe also to keep in mind with a question like this is sometimes it does make sense to concentrate more on fewer pages, just to kind of get that strategic advantage of having fewer pages that are stronger, rather than having a lot of pages where you're essentially diluting the value. Like if you have these 1,000 pages and they each provide a small tidbit of the bigger picture, then those 1,000 pages are probably going to have a hard time in search. Whereas if you can combine a lot of that into, I don't know, maybe 10 pages, then those 10 pages will have a lot of information on them, and maybe a lot of value kind of relative to the rest of your site, and maybe have it easier to rank for kind of broader search terms around that topic. Let's see. Google documentation shows that using parameters for locale-specific URLs is suboptimal, but none of the cons look like real deal killers to me. The 3 cons listed are segmentation is difficult. Users might not recognize geotargeting from the URL. And Search Console geotargeting is not possible. But there's nothing listed there that indicates that parameter locale-specific URLs would cause problems in crawling, indexing, or ranking. So my question is, do URLs like this present any real issue for Googlebot? So I think there are a few things kind of that fall into that, which are kind of in that graph and in the document as well. On the first hand, from a crawling point of view, these kind of URLs are perfectly fine. For the most part, if we can tell that the parameters that you're specifying here, like you have locale equals JA-JP. If we can recognize that these parameters are useful parameters, then we will try to crawl and index all of those pages individually. On the other hand, if these locale parameters that you're providing are a lot of different locales, and then when you load the page, it says, oh, we don't know that language. Here's the English version. Then our systems might learn that actually this locale parameter is not so useful, and we start to ignore it. So that's kind of the one thing to watch out for there. The other thing that is mentioned in the cons is geo-targeting. And in Search Console, you can do geo-targeting by subdomain, by the main domain itself, and by subdirectory. And you can't do geo-targeting based on URL parameters. So if there's something where you need to have geo-targeting, if you really, really want to make sure that Google understands that these pages are actually uniquely targeted for this specific country, then I would really recommend making sure that you have some setup that uses at least subdirectories so that you can verify those separately and set the geo-targeting individually for those pages. When it comes to geo-targeting, it isn't something that you need for all kinds of content. In particular, if it's something where you have content that changes subtly based on different locations, or if you have content that is essentially is just in different languages, then probably you don't need geo-targeting for that. On the other hand, if it's something where it's really unique to that location, and you can tell when users search for something that matches your site that they're looking for something local, then geo-targeting definitely makes sense. So for example, if you're searching for washing machine repair, then probably geo-targeting makes sense because you want someone local. If you're searching for washing machine repair manual, then geo-targeting doesn't make any sense at all because that manual isn't specific to that country. It's something that's available everywhere. And that's kind of the one thing to look at there, whether or not you actually need geo-targeting, or if it's essentially more the language targeting that you're trying to do. And for language targeting, having that just in the URL parameter is perfectly fine. Let's see. I mean, international sites are always tricky. So it's also something where I would try to get some help from someone who's worked on other big international sites, just to make sure that you're not doing anything otherwise kind of problematic that you might need to watch out for. The hard part, I think, with language and international sites in general is it's very easy to go down the route of saying, well, I have all of these countries, all of these languages. I will just create a million versions of my pages. And then you're stuck in that situation again where you have all of these different versions of pages, and Google has to figure out which ones of these are actually useful. And finding that balance between having fewer pages and having enough to kind of cover the need for your users, that's sometimes tricky. I'm trying to make sure that our SEO rankings don't take a hit while we roll out our new search results page. For some context, our searches can result in 10,000 results and have filtering and sorting functionality. My question is, does Google treat these pages within or how does Google treat these pages within websites? How do the search results affect the overall ranking for the website? And is it enough to just be submitting sitemaps for ranking? Or should we take additional consideration to help Googlebot to gather all of the reachable URLs? So yeah, so I think maybe the last question first. I would not rely on sitemaps to find all of the pages of your website. Sitemaps should be a way to give additional information about your website. It should not be the primary way of giving information of your website. So in particular, internal linking is super important and something you should definitely watch out for, and make sure that however you set things up, when someone crawls your website, they're able to find all of your content, and not that they rely on kind of the sitemap file to get all of these things. And from that point of view, kind of being able to go to these kind of category pages, perhaps, and being able to actually find all the products that are in individual categories, I think is super useful. Being able to crawl through the category pages to the product is also very important. Search results pages, I think, are a little bit of a unique area because some sites use category pages, essentially like search results pages. And then you're kind of in that situation where search results pages are essentially like category pages. If that's the case for you, I would kind of watch out for everything that you would do with category pages. The other thing with search result pages is that people can enter anything and search for something, and your site has to do all the work to kind of generate all of these things. And that can easily result in an infinite number of URLs that are theoretically findable on your website because people can search in a lot of different ways. And because that creates kind of this set of infinite pages on your website, that's something that we try to discourage, where we'd say, either set these search results pages to no index or use robots text to block crawling of these search results pages so that we can focus on the normal site structure and the normal internal linking. So I think those are kind of the primary aspects there. If you do want to have your search results pages indexed, then my tip would be to make sure that, on the one hand, you have one primary sort order and filtering set up as a canonical. So if you, I don't know, choose to provide your pages by relevance, then if you have a sort filter for by price, up or down, then I would set the rel canonical of those filters to your primary sort order. And similarly for filtering, I would perhaps kind of remove the filter with the rel canonical. Doing this makes sure that we can more focus on the primary version of the pages and crawl those properly, rather than that we get distracted by all of these variations of the search results pages. And the other thing I would watch out for is that you create some kind of an allow list or some kind of a system on your site with regards to the type of search queries that you want to allow to be indexed or crawled. So for example, if someone goes to your website and searches for, I don't know, Canadian pharmaceutical or something like that, and you're not a pharmaceutical website, you probably don't want that search page to be indexed. Even if you don't have any products that are available that match that query, you probably don't want to have that indexed. So having a list of the allowed searches that you do allow to have indexed makes that a lot easier, and make sure that you don't accidentally run into this kind of spam situation where someone is spamming your search results, and then you have to clean up like millions of pages that are indexed and get rid of them somehow. So many things to keep in mind with search results pages. Wow. Let's see. Next one I have here is my website had a drop in visitors due to poor core web vitals. Now I'm back on track, but came to know that the page experience update is now slowing out also for desktop. What is the page experience ranking to desktop, and how important is it compared to the other ranking factors? So like on mobile, the page experience ranking factor is essentially something that gives us a little bit extra information. These different pages that could show up in the search results. And in situations where we have a strong, clear kind of intent from the query, where we can understand that they really want to go to this website, then from that point of view, we kind of can ease off on using page experience as a ranking factor. On the other hand, if all of the content is very similar in the search results page, then probably using page experience helps a little bit to understand which of these are fast pages or reasonable pages with regards to the user experience, and which of these are kind of the less reasonable pages to show in the search results. And that kind of situation helps us there. With regards to the desktop rollout, I believe this is going to be a slower rollout again over the course of something like a month, which means you would not be seeing a strong effect from one day to the next, but rather you would see that effect over a period of time. You would also already see that in Search Console, in the reports for page experience and core web vitals. You would also already see that on desktop that everything is red, for example, and that you need to focus on that. So from that point of view, with the desktop ranking change, like with the mobile one, I wouldn't expect a kind of a drastic jump in the search results from one day to the next as we roll this out. Like at most, if things are really bad for your website, you would see a kind of a gradual drop there. Let's see. And how important is it compared to other ranking signals? I think we looked at that briefly. The other thing I might kind of caution against is kind of the first sentence that you had, that your website dropped due to poor core web vitals. I suspect, for the most part, websites would not see a kind of a big change, big visible change when it comes to core web vitals. Even if your website goes from being kind of reasonable to being kind of in that poor bucket in the core web vitals from one day to the next, I would not expect to see that as a kind of a giant change in the search results. Maybe changing a few positions, that seems kind of the right change there. But I would not see it as a page going from, I don't know, ranking number 2 to ranking number 50 like that, just because of core web vitals. If you are seeing a drastic change like that, I would not focus on purely core web vitals. I would try to take a step back and look at the overall picture and see what else could there be involved, and kind of try to figure out what you can do to improve things overall, rather than just purely focusing on core web vitals. Because core web vitals is something that does take a lot of work to get right. And it is sometimes hard to get all of these things lined up. But it's also, like I mentioned, something which is more of a subtle ranking factor and not like a super strong one. So it's something where if you're seeing strong changes, I would recommend not kind of like spending too much time on the core web vital side, and rather trying to figure out what is the bigger change, or where is that coming from for your site. Can you think of a reason a site's rankings in Google would fluctuate so much? Top 5 rankings for a host of keyword, one weekend, and then out of the results for about 2 weeks, and then seeing it ranking on and off like this for months. No technical issues. All other pages on the site that share the same page template have consistent ranks. I don't know. It's hard to say without an example. It sounds a lot like, I don't know, like things overall for the site are going well, and just one individual page is kind of jumping in and out like this. And when that happens, usually that's a sign that for one particular ranking algorithm factor, or one particular part of our rankings, the page isn't like super clear in the good set or in the bad set, and then our algorithm is kind of on the edge there. Without knowing the site and without kind of being able to kind of jump in, look at some of the details there, it feels like something where our systems are not sure about the relevance overall, or perhaps even with regards to kind of the spamminess or the quality overall of the site or of that particular page. So that might be something I'd look at there, but it's really kind of hard to say without seeing the examples. All right, maybe we can jump back to some of the live questions, since we still have so many people with their hands up. I also have some more time afterwards if any of you want to stick around and kind of go through the rest of the questions. Let's see, Larry, I think you're up next.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Hi.
I work with a very large healthcare provider in the US, top 5. So we're talking thousands of providers, hundreds of locations. I'm building out schema, and I'm doing it exactly like it should be done. I'm doing symptoms, treatments, health insurance that's accepted, everything like that. I'm building it out and then testing it in the schema validator. But then when I go over to the rich results test for Google, it doesn't validate. When I go to Google Search Console, it's not showing up. So I'm guessing that it's wrong, but I'm building it to a tool that I thought was going to be correct. So what should I do to actually get this to validate?
I think there are 2 main things that kind of play a role here. On the one hand, the validator on schema.org is set up to validate all kinds of theoretical schemas that you can provide with schema.org. And that's kind of the superset of all functionality. And the validator in Search Console is based purely on functionality that has visible changes in Google Search. And that's usually a very small subset of the bigger schema.org kind of set of things that you can mark up. So for example, if you're marking things up that don't have a visible effect in the search results in terms of maybe like shows stars or shows a video or something like that, then that would be something where Search Console would say, well, I don't see anything that here, which might kind of fall into that category that you're seeing there. The other thing that sometimes plays a role with regards to elements that do have a visible effect is that on schema.org, the requirements are sometimes not the same as in Google search. So schema.org will have some required properties and some optional properties. And it kind of validates based on those. And in Google search, sometimes we have a stricter set of requirements that we have documented in our Help Center as well to kind of say, well, we would like to show it in this special way in the search results. And we can only do that if we have this set of information. So from that point of view, on the one hand, if Google doesn't show it in the search results, then we would not show it in the testing tool. And on the other hand, if the requirements are different and Google's requirements are stricter and you don't follow those guidelines, then we would also flag that as, I don't know, an error or a warning in the testing tool.
Is there any way to tell what the items are that are not recognized by Google? Or is it just a hit and miss with trying to do it? Because this thing is extremely well built out so that the search engines would completely understand everything that's in there is on the page. Just having frustration with doing this. Should I be building two sets of schema, one that Google recognizes and then the others that it doesn't recognize? You see what I mean?
Yeah, you could theoretically do that. I think it depends on what your goal is with the structured data that you're providing there. If your goal is really, I just want this visible in search, which is kind of the people that tend to come to us because they're focused on search, then usually you would just provide whatever Google needs and specify that. We have the different types of features that we support in the search developer documentation. I think there's a big compilation there. That's something where usually my recommendation is sites should go there, look at the features that they think are relevant, and then implement just those features. Kind of going the other way around and saying, well, I'll implement everything and then see if there's a feature that matches there. That's sometimes a bit trickier. It's just like more work, I think. If there are specific things that you're trying to do with the structured data for other providers, for other search engines, or maybe you have an internal search engine that runs over your site, or some kind of, I don't know, other system that extracts information from your site, then you might have other requirements there that you want to take care of. And it can happen that you have kind of one set for kind of your general structured data and one set specific for the search results. And from our point of view, that's also fine.
Yeah, most of my limitation is in the medical web page because schema says you can do all this stuff, and when I do it, then it doesn't validate. So I'll do that last thing you mentioned about taking a look at that, and that's called the search developer documentation.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. All right, Dave.
Hi, John. I work on a fairly large multilingual site, and in April last year, just all in one go, all of our translated content moved from valid to excluded, crawled, currently not indexed. And there it has stayed since April. We've gone through, because it happened all at once, we thought maybe there was some systemic change on our side. We did a massive change to our posting platform, content management system, et cetera. We've gone through the code extensively. We can't find anything. We can't find any change to content. We don't see any notes in the Google search release notes that look like they'd be affecting us as far as we can tell. We've also been pretty thorough going through and just doing best practice searches with Search Console. We've cleaned up our hreflangs, canonicals, URL params, manual actions, and every other tool that's listed on developers.google.com/search. I'm just about out of ideas. I don't know what's happened or what to do next to try to fix the issue, but I'd really like to get our translated content back in the index.
Mm-hmm. I think you posted a question as well with a link to a forum thread. Was that you?
I did, with a little bit more detail as well. Yeah.
OK. Yeah, I took a look at that briefly before and passed some of that on to the team here as well. One of the things that I think is sometimes tricky is you have the parameter at the end with the language code, I think, HL equals
Right.
whatever.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. From our point of view, what can happen is that when we recognize that there are a lot of these parameters there that lead to the same content, then our systems can kind of get stuck into a situation, well, maybe this parameter is not very useful, and we should just ignore it. And to me, it sounds a lot like something around that line happened. And partially, you can help this with the URL parameter tool in Search Console to make sure that that parameter is actually set. I do want to have everything indexed. Partially, what you could also do is maybe to crawl a portion of your website with, I don't know, local crawler to see what kind of parameter URLs actually get picked up, and then double check that those pages actually have useful content for those languages. In particular, things like a common one that I've seen on sites is maybe you have, I don't know, all languages linked up, and the Japanese version says, oh, we don't have a Japanese version. Here's our English one instead. Then our systems could say, well, the Japanese version is the same as the English version. Maybe there's some other languages the same as the English version. We should just ignore that. And sometimes this is from links within the website. Sometimes it's also external links, people who are linking to your site. If the parameter is at the end of your URL, then it's very common that there's some kind of garbage attached to the parameter as well. And if we crawl all of those URLs with that garbage and we say, oh, well, this is not a valid language, here's the English version, then it again kind of reinforces that loop where our systems say, well, maybe this parameter is not so useful. So the cleaner approach there would be if you have kind of garbage parameters to redirect to the cleaner ones, or to maybe even show a 404 page and say, well, we don't know what you're talking about with this URL, to really cleanly make sure that whichever URLs we find, we actually get some useful content that is not the same as other content which we've already seen.
OK. I think
Yeah.
with the URL parameter thing, we'd had it set to this parameter translates like Googlebot decide for a very long time. And we recently changed it to always crawl. And we can see now that it is always crawling, but it's still not indexing. So,
OK.
You mentioned something earlier on in today's session about not relying on sitemaps for content for discovery. I don't know that we have a lot of great links from, say, the English version of a site to another language version of the same site on the page, but we use hreflang attributes in the sitemap to try to indicate that. Is that sufficient for that use case, or do I also need to provide very easily discoverable links to the translated versions?
Ideally, you would have a link to the translated versions. And usually what happens with sites is you don't need a link from every page to every page. I mean, that's kind of the best practice anyway, that you can switch between languages directly on the page. But for crawling, you don't necessarily need that. But rather, as soon as we find one page that is in French, from there, we can usually crawl out and see, well, here's the rest of the site in French, and pick all of that up. So that's something where sometimes it's enough to have, I don't know, in the footer of the home page, like this site is also available in these different languages. And you just directly link to those individual languages, kind of the home page. And based on that, we can actually discover the rest of the site.
OK. And then one last follow-up. I think you said local crawler is a tool I should try using. I'm not familiar with that. Where do I find that?
There are a number of kind of crawler tools that you can buy or download and use directly. I don't know all of them. Like
OK. So that wasn't a reference to a specific tool. That
or
was
something, but like theoretically, you could also create your own and just kind of like crawl with Python or something like that. But yeah.
Got it. OK. Sorry, I thought you were referring to a particular tool. OK. All right. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right. We still have more questions with people with their hands up, and I'll get to you right afterwards. I will just pause the recording for now. Thank you all for sticking around for so long, and thanks for all the questions that you submitted and asked here. If you're watching this recording on YouTube and you'd like to join one of these sessions, watch out for or in the community section of the YouTube channel. That's where we kind of link to the individual sessions that we do, and where we also post the URL to join these live. All right. And with that, let me pause here.